Imagine a U.S. engineer taking a digital photograph of, just a beautiful, perfectly normal sunset.
Right, just a standard photo.
Yeah, exactly. And they attached that photo to an email and sent it off. But buried inside the binary code of that image, completely invisible to the naked eye or even standard security scans, are the stolen blueprints for a General Electric aviation turbine, just quietly being smuggled across the globe.
It is wild. It really
It's
is.
crazy. Welcome to modern geopolitical competition, because it doesn't always look like tanks rolling across a border or bombers flying overhead. Sometimes it literally looks like a JPEG of a sunset.
It completely shatters how we traditionally think about conflict. For the last 80 years, basically since World War II, Americans have been playing on a board where the rules were clear, right?
Mhm.
The oceans provided this massive geographic shield.
Yeah, two giant moats.
Exactly. And uncontested dominance in manufacturing and technology was just assumed. But the game is changing, and the board looks entirely different now.
It really does. So, welcome to today's deep dive. Today, we are bringing you, the listener, into a deeply fascinating and heavily researched unclassified military intelligence briefing. It was originally presented by a U.S. Air Force intelligence officer, and our mission today is to explore the China threat. We're understanding not just the staggering military buildup, but the historical grievances, the highly innovative forms of non-military warfare, and the surprising vulnerabilities that have brought China to this exact moment in time.
But before we go any further, we really need to set a crucial ground rule for our deep dives today.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the source material we're unpacking touches heavily on geopolitical, political, and potentially highly charged content.
Yeah.
So it is vital to state clearly to you, our listener, that we're not taking sides here.
Right, we are endorsing anything.
Right, we are not endorsing the viewpoints, the military strategies, or the political assessments of the original briefing. Our goal here is purely informational. We are impartially unpacking the claims, the data, and the historical context exactly as the source material presents them, just so you can understand what is actually being discussed at the highest levels of military intelligence.
Yeah, perfectly said. And there is one vital distinction the material makes right out of the gate that frames this entire discussion. When this intelligence talks about the threat, it is specifically referring to the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP.
Yes, that's a huge distinction.
Right, it is not talking about the Chinese people themselves. In fact, just to put that in perspective, only about 6.85% of the entire Chinese population actually participates in the Chinese Communist Party.
Right, and that distinction separates the ruling apparatus and its grand strategy from the general populace.
Yeah.
We're analyzing the strategic maneuvers of a specific government, not an entire culture of people.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand the staggering military numbers and, the invisible warfare of today, we really have to understand the historical psychology of yesterday. Why is the Chinese government making these massive geopolitical moves right now? Where does this intense, almost frantic drive come from?
Well, it comes from a historical trauma they literally refer to as the century of humiliation.
The century of humiliation.
Yeah. And to understand this, you have to zoom way out. China is one of the oldest continuous civilizations in the world, dating back to roughly 1250 BC. For centuries, they viewed themselves as the literal center of the known world.
The Middle Kingdom, right?
Exactly. And by the late 18th century, the Qing dynasty had reached its absolute zenith.
Uh,
But then the 1800s arrived, and China suffered a catastrophic century of exploitation at the hands of Western powers.
and that really kicks off with the Opium Wars, which is a wild mechanism of control when you think about it.
Oh, it's brutal.
Yeah, the British were running a massive trade deficit with China, so to balance the books, British merchant traffickers intentionally flooded China with opium. And when the Chinese government tried to stop their population from being addicted, what happened? The British and French militaries arrived and completely crushed them.
And the resulting fallout forced China to sign what are known as unequal treaties. These involve massive tariffs, forced territorial concessions, and just crippling reparations.
Right.
So from roughly 1796 all the way into the 20th century, China was effectively removed from its historical position as a major world power, and its citizens were plunged into systemic poverty.
But there is one specific turning point during this period that is just psychologically devastating, according to the briefing. Fast forward to World War I, China actually supported the Allies. They sent laborers, they contributed to the war effort, and they fully expected that as a reward for their loyalty, the Shandong Peninsula, which had been colonized by the Germans, would be returned to them.
And that peninsula is incredibly important.
Yeah. If you are listening to this and wondering why one peninsula matters, this isn't just a random strip of land. This is the birthplace of Confucius. The cultural and historical weight of this territory is immense.
But the reward never came. At the 1919 Treaty of Versailles, U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, who was adhering to this complex web of existing Western treaties, agreed to hand the Shandong Peninsula over to the Japanese Empire instead.
Just imagine the psychological shock of that betrayal. You are the oldest civilization on Earth. You've been humiliated for a century. You finally play by the West's rules to help them win a world war, and they take your most sacred cultural homeland and just hand it to a rival power.
The Chinese public was absolutely outraged.
It is essentially a multi-generational revenge story. It's like an underdog sports narrative where the team genuinely believes the referees have rigged the game against them for 100 years. You can see how that specific, perceived betrayal pushed them entirely away from American-style democracy and right into the arms of Soviet communism by 1921.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it explains their entire modern geopolitical posture. In Beijing's view today, the current U.S.-led, post-World War II liberal world order isn't the natural state of things.
Right.
To them, it is a profoundly galling exception to history. It's an order built while China was divided, addicted, and weak. So the mandate of the Chinese Communist Party is essentially to set history right, to return China to the top of the global hierarchy.
And they have a very specific, publicly stated timeline for this so-called China dream.
They do. By 2025, they want technological parity with the West. By 2035, they want a fully modernized military. And the ultimate deadline is 2049.
Which is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China. And if you're listening to this and thinking 2049 sounds like, I don't know, a lifetime away in some sci-fi future,
Yeah.
remember that in geopolitical terms, 25 years is basically tomorrow.
Oh, absolutely. It's right around the corner.
By that year, their official goal is to lead the world in composite national strength, meaning they want to be the undisputed global leader militarily, economically, culturally, and informationally.
But that raises a massive strategic problem for Beijing. How do you plan to win and achieve global dominance against an opponent, the United States, that currently possesses vastly superior military hardware and decades of combat experience?
You definitely don't fight them head on.
Exactly. You completely redefine what the word war actually means.
And the intelligence points to a very specific structural playbook for this. Back in 1999, two colonels from the People's Liberation Army published a book called Unrestricted Warfare.
That book changed everything.
Yeah, their core thesis was brilliant in a deeply unsettling way. They argue that the United States is overly obsessed with kinetic warfare, meaning planes, tanks, and bombs. The colonels suggested that China could defeat a technologically superior foe by completely blurring the lines between peace and war. You use economic warfare, legal warfare, technological warfare, and information warfare to just weaken the enemy from the inside out.
A prime example of this information warfare is how the data views TikTok. The platform, which is owned by the Chinese company ByteDance, is described in the strategic overview as a Trojan horse. But the mechanism of how it operates is what's truly alarming.
The contrast is wild. It's like feeding your own kids vegetables and strictly enforcing bedtime while handing your neighbor's kids unlimited candy, handing them an iPad, and telling them to stay up all night.
That's a great way to put it.
Here in the US, the app collects massive amounts of metadata, biometrics, and IP addresses, which feeds an algorithm known to push highly addictive, sometimes harmful content that fuels political division and mental health issues in kids. But the domestic version inside China.
It's totally different.
Yeah, the algorithm pushes educational content, science experiments, and literally enforces strict screen time curfews for Chinese children. It is a deliberate algorithmic asymmetry in societal nourishment.
And that concept of unrestricted warfare extends into the physical realm with drug warfare, too.
Oh, the fentanyl crisis.
Yes. Fentanyl is currently the #1 killer of Americans under the age of 50, costing the U.S. economy roughly $1 trillion a year. But the historical parallel drawn here is what makes it a strategic weapon. In the 1950s, the communist strategy under Zhou Enlai was to systematically use opium to addict and weaken the Chinese nationalist forces, making their regions easier to conquer.
Wow. And today, the mechanism for fentanyl distribution provides Beijing with perfect plausible deniability. Because Chinese chemical labs aren't shipping fentanyl directly to Los Angeles, instead they use cryptocurrency to sell the precursor chemicals to Mexican cartels.
Right?
Then the cartels synthesize the drug and flood it across the U.S. border. It degrades the American population and drains the economy, all while the Chinese government can just shrug and say it's a Mexican cartel problem.
Espionage is another invisible front line. Beyond the engineer hiding turbine blueprints in a digital sunset, there are calculated influence campaigns aimed at the most granular levels of American society.
Like the elementary school thing.
Yeah. For instance, an initiative where 50 fourth graders in Utah made Stay Strong China videos addressing President Xi as Grandpa Xi. Those seemingly innocent videos were then broadcast on Chinese state media as propaganda to show American deference.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though, because I have to push back a little on how broadly we are defining this threat. Let's look at another example from the data. A Chinese real estate company tries to buy a North Dakota corn mill that just happens to be sandwiched between a U.S. strategic command site with nuclear silos and an Air Force base.
Yes, the Grand Forks incident.
Right. Is that a coordinated act of war? Or is that just opportunistic capitalism that happens to pose a security risk? I mean, a smartphone app, an agricultural real estate deal, fourth graders writing letters. Can we really call all of this unrestricted warfare?
It's the natural American reaction to ask that, but it's exactly where the American and Chinese mindsets fundamentally diverge. Under China's doctrine of comprehensive national power, that distinction you just made between opportunistic capitalism and state-sponsored warfare simply does not exist.
Oh, really? None at all?
None. There is no hard line between the civilian sector and the military sector in China. Under their national intelligence laws, any Chinese company must surrender its data or assets to the state if asked. So, a corn mill near a nuclear silo isn't just a real estate investment, it is legally and practically an intelligence-gathering node. To their strategic command, every single sector is a weapon.
Wow. But invisible warfare only works if it's backed by a credible physical threat. I mean, you can't just hack, influence, and buy your way to global dominance forever. Eventually, you need the kinetic muscle to protect your new borders and enforce your will. And China is absolutely building that hard power.
They are currently executing the largest, most rapid peacetime military buildup the world has seen in 100 years. The overarching strategy is known as A2AD, which stands for Anti-Access Area Denial.
So how exactly does A2AD work? Because it sounds like a boring bureaucratic acronym, but the reality is mathematically terrifying for the U.S. Navy.
Think of A2AD as creating layered, impenetrable bubbles of overlapping missile ranges extending out from the Chinese coast. The entire goal is to make it mathematically and financially too costly for U.S. ships or planes to even enter the Indo-Pacific region.
So just keep us out entirely.
Exactly. If a U.S. aircraft carrier enters that bubble, it risks being sunk before its own planes are even in range to strike.
And the specific hardware they've built to enforce these bubbles is cutting edge. Take the DF-26B. The military calls it a carrier killer. But how does a ballistic missile hit a moving aircraft carrier in the middle of the ocean?
It's the maneuverability.
Yeah, it uses hypersonic maneuverability in its terminal phase. That means as it re-enters the atmosphere, it doesn't just fall in a predictable arc like a normal missile. It glides and adjusts its trajectory at blinding speeds, making it nearly impossible for our defense systems to intercept. It has the range to hit U.S. bases on the island of Guam, which is nearly 2,500 nautical miles away.
And the technological gap is shrinking rapidly across all domains. Consider their new air-to-air missiles. The data indicates these new weapons can outrange the United States' highly trusted AMRAAM missiles.
Which means, in a theoretical dogfight, a Chinese jet can fire at an American pilot before the American pilot even hears a lock-on warning. It completely flips the concept of American air superiority on its head.
And when you look at the broader institutional assessments of U.S. readiness, the contrast is stark. The Heritage Foundation recently released an index rating the U.S. Air Force as very weak, citing the fact that U.S. fighter jets average 32 years old, alongside severe pilot retention issues.
32 years old, that's older than some of the pilots.
Exactly, and the U.S. Navy was rated as weak. Meanwhile, China is churning out naval ships at a staggering 7-to-1 ratio compared to the United States.
How are they building ships 7 times faster than we are?
Through dual-use infrastructure. In China, commercial shipyards are built to military specifications. A dry dock building a commercial ferry one month can instantly pivot to repairing a naval destroyer the next. Every civilian maritime facility is basically a naval reserve asset. Furthermore, China's nuclear stockpile, which was traditionally kept quite small as a minimum deterrent, is projected to hit over 4,000 warheads by the year 2030.
And all of this military hardware is backed by an explosive economic transformation. If you look at the intelligence photos of Shanghai from 1990, the skyline was basically flat, just a few unremarkable buildings. Fast forward 30 years, and it is a completely unrecognizable, hyper-modern megacity packed with skyscrapers.
It's unbelievable growth.
And then you contrast that with the United States today, where the national debt sits at 134% of our gross domestic product. We're slipping further into debt just to fund our current legacy systems, while they are physically building the infrastructure of the future.
What's fascinating here is that despite all this incredible hardware and infrastructure, the People's Liberation Army does have one glaring weakness. They haven't actually fought a kinetic war since 1979 against Vietnam.
Right.
They lack modern combat experience, but their high command knows this. So they are meticulously studying the United States' 20-year war on terror in the Middle East, and they are intensely observing the modern drone and artillery tactics of Russia's war in Ukraine. They're even restructuring their command centers to mimic the U.S. Joint Command structure and conducting massive, complex live-fire exercises to artificially manufacture that missing combat experience.
Okay, listening to all this, it sounds incredibly bleak. They have the long-term historical drive of a multi-generational grudge. They are fighting an invisible war across our digital and economic systems, and they are building hypersonic missiles and naval fleets way faster than we can keep up.
It does sound intimidating.
But the intelligence reveals that China actually has massive systemic vulnerabilities, Achilles heels that could ironically make them far more dangerous in the short term.
Precisely. China simply cannot sustain itself internally. First, they are a massive net importer of food. They rely on foreign imports for 72% of their food, buying from places like Brazil, Canada, and ironically, the United States.
That's a huge vulnerability.
It is. And second, they are a massive net importer of energy. The geographic mechanism here is critical. 82% of all of China's oil passes through a single narrow maritime checkpoint called the Strait of Malacca near Singapore. If a conflict breaks out and that strait is blockaded by a superior naval force, the Chinese military and economy run out of gas very quickly.
And then there's the demographic cliff, which might be the most unsolvable problem they face. Their population had been growing steadily since 1960, but it actually began declining in 2020.
Because of the one-child policy.
Yeah, because of the lingering effects of the one-child policy, the projections show their population will drop rapidly right around 2049. Remember, 2049 is their ultimate publicly stated deadline for global dominance. You are going to have an inverted population pyramid, an incredibly massive aging population of retirees trying to financially support a hyper-modern military with a shrinking base of young workers to pay the taxes or hold the rifles.
This demographic and economic reality leads us directly into what geopolitical scholars call the stagnation trap. A 2012 study analyzed 16 historical instances where a rapidly emerging power rivaled an established ruling power. In 12 of those 16 instances, the rivalry ended in kinetic war.
So what does this all mean? If you look at their situation, their population is shrinking. They don't have enough food to feed their people internally. They rely on a single ocean strait for their oil, and their 2049 deadline is approaching. Is all this intense military aggression and rapid shipbuilding actually a sign of panic? Like a closing window of opportunity?
Historical patterns align perfectly with that theory. War isn't usually the result of an emerging power smoothly and peacefully surpassing the ruling power. War is statistically most likely when an emerging power experiences a long period of rapid growth, suddenly faces severe stagnation, and lashes out in a panic to secure its global position before its demographic and economic window closes for good.
Wow.
A long, proud rise, followed by the terrifying prospect of a sharp decline, is the absolute most dangerous trajectory in world politics. And that perfectly describes China's current reality.
So with this ticking demographic clock on their side and the missile gap on ours, how is the United States actually responding to this unprecedented peer-to-peer competition? The Pentagon isn't just sitting still, right?
No, the U.S. is aggressively pivoting. The response strategy is built around the Pacific Deterrence Initiative. One of the key tactical changes is a mechanism called Agile Combat Employment, or ACE.
Because of those hypersonic carrier killer missiles we talked about earlier.
Exactly. The U.S. can no longer rely on huge, static super bases in the Pacific because they are basically sitting ducks for Chinese long-range strikes. Instead, the ACE strategy is to move aircraft, equipment, and personnel quickly and frequently between small, scattered, austere island airstrips across the Pacific.
Oh, I see.
It turns the U.S. military into a constantly moving target, making it mathematically exhausting and much harder for Chinese missiles to lock onto any single concentration of power.
And there is a massive technological race happening right now just to solve the geography problem. The Pacific Ocean is famously huge. The military refers to it as the tyranny of distance. Let's do the math on this. The distance between the key U.S. base in Guam and the Chinese coast near Hong Kong is roughly 699 nautical miles. But the combat radius of an American F-35 fighter jet, the distance it can fly out, fight, and return, is only about 590 nautical miles.
So they are mathematically stranded. Our absolute best fighter jets can't even make it from our base to the conflict zone without running out of gas halfway there.
Right. So to solve this, the U.S. Navy is developing the MQ-25 Stingray. It is an unmanned, highly stealthy aerial refueler. Its entire job is to fly out into contested airspace and gas up our fighter jets midair without putting a massive, vulnerable, manned tanker crew at risk. It's a technological bridge over the tyranny of distance.
And beyond the military tech, the intelligence emphasizes that the United States maintains fundamental structural advantages that China simply lacks. The U.S. is a net exporter of both food and energy. In a global crisis, we are largely self-sufficient.
That is a massive advantage.
It really is. We have a population that, due to immigration and birth rates, is actually projected to continue growing past 2060. And crucially, we have deep, historically rooted global alliances, NATO, Japan, South Korea, Australia, whereas China essentially relies on highly transactional, often fragile economic partnerships.
Which brings this all back to you, listening right now. Because it is really easy to hear about hypersonic terminal velocities, dual-use shipyards, and South China Sea Island bases and think, okay, that's fascinating distant military theory, but what does that have to do with my Tuesday morning?
Right, it feels far away.
Yeah, but the reality is this invisible competition touches everything. A failure to deter China directly impacts the global economy and the supply chains that stock your local grocery store. It impacts what smartphone apps your kids are using and whether the algorithm is designed to educate them or distract them. It impacts whether your electronic medical records are secure from state-sponsored data harvesting.
Exactly.
And fundamentally, it determines whether the liberal democratic world order, the system that guarantees the physical and economic freedoms you enjoy right now, will even exist in the year 2049.
This raises an important question, and it's a thought I really want to leave you with today. The strategic data mentioned China's overarching desire to export its specific model of society. If China can successfully demonstrate to the developing world over the next 20 years that a nation can achieve hyper-modern tech prosperity, massive infrastructure growth, and absolute societal safety without the messy, slow inefficiencies of a voting democracy, does their brand of authoritarian capitalism become the most appealing export of the 21st century?
That is a chilling thought.
Because ultimately, this isn't just a military battle over missile ranges in the Pacific. It is a profound battle over the future definition of what a successful human society actually looks like.
And that brings us right back to that invisible scoreboard we talked about at the very beginning. The game is absolutely happening all around us, in our phones, our supply chains, and our oceans, whether we realize we are on the court or not. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and we will catch you on the next one.